At 8:10 this morning in southern Iran, a girls' school in the city of Maddow was hit by an airstrike. The first period had just started. 40 girls are dead, 60 more are injured, dozens are still trapped under rubble. Their ages, somewhere between 7 and 15. This is not a number, this is not a headline, this is not collateral damage in a geopolitical analysis. This is someone's daughter. This is 40 families who will never be the same. This is a classroom that will never finish its lesson. The strike was part of a joint U.S.-Israeli operation that began hours ago, a massive, coordinated attack on Iran that President Trump announced from Mar-a-Lago just after 2:30 a.m. Eastern Time. He called it major combat operations. He said the goal is to raise their missile industry to the ground and annihilate their navy. He also called on the Iranian people to rise up and take over your government. But in Maddow, there were no government officials in that school, no missile launchers, no Revolutionary Guard commanders. Just girls, learning, at the start of their day. Here's what we know, and here's what we don't. This wasn't accidental, it was planned. The actor is the United States and Israel operating in coordination. The move is the most extensive attack on Iranian soil since the 1979 revolution. And the timing, just days after nuclear talks in Geneva ended without a deal, is not a coincidence. Let's understand the layers. First, the strategic calculation. According to a person briefed on military plans, this operation was planned for months. The U.S. and Israel coordinated closely. The targeting was deliberate. Leadership compounds in Tehran, military infrastructure in Isfahan, nuclear-related sites across the country. The school in Maddow, it sits near a base of Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard. Whether the strike was misdirected or the school was simply too close to a legitimate military target, we don't know yet. What we know is that 40 girls are dead. Second, the domestic political layer. President Trump oversaw the start of operations from Mar-a-Lago, joined by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane. The video announcement was 8 minutes long. It was posted to Truth Social at 2:30 a.m., primetime viewing for insomniacs and early risers, but also a deliberate attempt to control the narrative before morning news cycles. He warned that American lives may be lost. He offered total immunity to Iranian forces who lay down their weapons. And he explicitly called for regime change, something previous administrations have avoided saying aloud. Third, the diplomatic timing. The third round of indirect U.S.-Iran talks ended Thursday in Geneva. No deal. Technical discussions were scheduled to resume next week in Vienna. Omani mediators had reported substantial progress. Iran had allegedly agreed never to stockpile enriched uranium. But Iran refused to discuss American demands on three things: giving up enrichment entirely, limiting ballistic missile range, and ending support to regional allies. Those refusals became the justification for what happened this morning. Fourth, the military positioning. 16 U.S. Navy ships were already in the region. 2 carrier strike groups. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier, had just arrived. Dozens of U.S. Air Force fighters were positioned across Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain. When nations spend billions to reposition forces, it's rarely for optics. In geopolitics, timing is never accidental. You might think this is happening far away. It's not. That school in Maddow, 40 girls dead, is connected to you in ways you don't realize yet. Here's how. Ali Vaez, who directs the Iran project at the International Crisis Group, posted this morning, Iran sits along the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply passes. Even limited disruption could spike energy prices, fuel inflation, and rattle global markets. That's not abstract, that's what you pay at the pump. And those THAAD interceptors the U.S. fired during last June's exchange, more than 150 of them, roughly a quarter of the Pentagon's inventory, cost about $12 million each. Iranian missiles cost hundreds of thousands. The math of missile defense is not sustainable in a prolonged conflict. Your tax dollars, your supply chains, your energy prices, all connected to what happened this morning in a classroom in southern Iran. And now dozens of airlines have canceled flights to the Middle East. Dubai's airport, the world's busiest for international travel, has halted operations indefinitely. British Airways, Lufthansa, Air France, Emirates, Flydubai, Qatar Airways, Turkish Airlines, Indian Air, all suspended. If you have travel plans, if you have family in the region, if you have investments in global markets, this is already affecting you. Are we watching a necessary act of self-defense or the beginning of a wider war that no one can control? Drop a comment. Do you think the U.S. should have struck Iran or should negotiations have continued? Here's where it changes. The military reality is unfolding in real time. What was hit? At Tehran, the compound of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Satellite imagery from Airbus shows black smoke rising from the compound. Several buildings damaged. His whereabouts are unknown. Tehran, the presidential palace district where the National Security Council is located. Isfahan, military and nuclear-related sites. Karaj, Tabriz, Shiraz, explosions reported. Western towns, multiple locations struck. Asaluya, a critical Persian Gulf port city, part of Iran's major oil trade infrastructure. Minab, a girls' school, 40 dead, 60 injured. The targeting strategy. According to the plan presented to President Trump, Israel is focusing on missile storage sites, production facilities, and launchers. The U.S. is focusing on Iran's nuclear program, Revolutionary Guard targets, and government-related facilities. Dozens of U.S. strikes are being carried out by attack planes from bases and aircraft carriers across the Middle East. This is expected to continue for several days. The retaliation. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched Truthful Promise 4, a coordinated retaliatory strike. Targets hit. Bahrain, the U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters. Qatar, Al Udeid Air Base, forward headquarters for U.S. Central Command. At Al Dhafra Air Base and Abu Dhabi, one civilian killed by debris in Abu Dhabi. Dubai, explosions near Jabal Ali Port, a major global shipping hub. Kuwait, U.S. military installations, attacks repelled. Saudi Arabia, Riyadh and Eastern Province, attacks repelled. Jordan, unspecified targets. Israel, multiple waves of missiles and drones, air defenses active. One man lightly wounded in northern Israel. An apartment building hit on the 20th floor. Iranian officials stated all U.S. military bases in the region are legitimate targets for Iran. Military movements aren't symbolic, they're expensive, and when nations spend billions to reposition forces, the consequences are measured in lives. Now watch what happens next. The economic mechanism is brutal. The Strait of Hormuz, 20% of the world's oil passes through it. Iran has threatened to block it for decades. Today, that threat became operational. A major oil exporter, a global business hub, home to millions of expatriates, was hit. One civilian dead. Explosions near Dubai's port. Qatar, which holds the largest natural gas reserves in the world after Russia and Iran, was hit. Al Udeid Air Base, where U.S. Central Command is headquartered, was targeted. Kuwait, a major oil producer, was hit. Attacks repelled, but the message was received. Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil exporter, was hit. Riyadh and the Eastern Province, where most of Saudi oil infrastructure sits. If this corridor closes, oil jumps. If oil jumps, inflation returns. If inflation returns, central banks tighten. And every central bank tightening from Washington to Frankfurt becomes a political event. But here's the part most people miss. The Strait of Hormuz is narrow. 2 nautical miles wide in each shipping lane. Easy to mine, easy to threaten, hard to defend indefinitely. Shipping insurance rates are already climbing. Airlines have canceled flights. Global supply chains are recalibrating. This is how regional conflict becomes global economic consequence. Here's where the pressure increases. Who supported the U.S.? Canada. Prime Minister Mark Carney supports the United States acting to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Called Iran principal source of instability and terror throughout the Middle East. Ukraine. President Zelensky voiced strong support, calling Iran an accomplice of Putin for supplying drones to Russia. It is fair to give the Iranian people a chance to rid themselves of a terrorist regime. And the United Kingdom expressed support for a negotiated solution, but was not involved in strikes. Urged against wider regional conflict. Emergency committee convened. Who condemned the U.S.? Russia called it a pre-planned and unprovoked act of armed aggression against a sovereign and independent UN member state. Warned of humanitarian, economic, and possibly radiological catastrophe. China, highly concerned, called for immediate halt to military actions and return to negotiations. Stated Iran's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity should be respected. Oman, the mediator in recent talks, expressed profound dismay, urged the U.S. not to get sucked in further, called for UN Security Council emergency session. Pakistan condemned unwarranted attacks on Iran, called for immediate halt to escalation. Cuba condemns the attacks as violation of international law and UN charter. Spain, Prime Minister Sanchez said he rejects the unilateral military action of the United States and Israel, who called for restraint. The European Union, Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa called strikes greatly concerning, urged maximum restraint and protection of civilians. In France, President Macron said outbreak of war carries grave consequences for international peace and security and must stop, urged Iran to engage in negotiations. Germany, government was informed in advance, crisis team meeting held. To Egypt, warned escalating tensions risk plunging the entire region into chaos, called for diplomacy. UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk condemned strikes, urged return to negotiations, said attacks bring death, destruction, and human misery. Japan, closely monitoring the developments with great concern due to energy security implications. The Gulf states, targeted by Iran, responded. Saudi Arabia strongly condemned Iranian assaults on Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, and Jordan, stood fully with those countries, and described attack as dangerous escalation, confirmed 1 civilian killed. The Qatar condemned attacks as flagrant violation of sovereignty. Bahrain called attacks blatant violation of sovereignty, reserved right to respond. Kuwait successfully repelled attacks, reserved right to self-defense. Silence in moments like this is strategy. When allies hesitate, adversaries probe. When allies speak, coalitions form. Right now, the coalition is fractured. This is where the risk peaks. Congressional notification. Conflicting reports. Some sources say at least some Gang of 8 congressional leaders were notified in advance. But Senator Jack Reed, ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, said through his spokesperson he was not notified. Senator Tim Kaine called the strikes dangerous, unnecessary, and idiotic. And he called for the Senate to return to session to vote on a war powers resolution to block use of U.S. forces. The Constitution grants Congress alone the power to formally declare war. This operation is not authorized by Congress. The legal question. President Trump's video acknowledged this is war. He cited the possibility of American casualties. But war without congressional authorization is constitutionally contested territory. The domestic political question. Trump's approval ratings have been volatile. Gas prices have been a key part of his domestic message. Lower prices since his return to the White House. This war threatens that narrative. If oil spikes, inflation returns. If inflation returns, midterm elections become referendums on the economy. Leaders under pressure take bigger risks. The next 24 hours matter. Iran has launched multiple waves of retaliation. The U.S. and Israeli campaign is expected to continue for several days. The next 30 days define direction. If current trends continue, here's what to watch. First, the IAEA's next report. Will Iran allow inspectors into damaged nuclear sites? Will the international community demand access? Second, defense budget votes in Congress. Sustained funding for a Middle East war requires political will that can erode over time. Third, Iranian missile inventories. How many missiles does Iran have left? How many interceptors does the U.S. have left? The math of missile defense is not infinite. Fourth, Gulf state positioning. Will Saudi Arabia and the maintain their declared neutrality, or will pressure from Washington force a choice? Their airspace is militarily significant. Fifth, the Strait of Hormuz. If Iran successfully disrupts oil traffic, the global economy reacts immediately. Based on historical precedent, wars in the Middle East follow predictable patterns. Initial strikes, retaliation, escalation, international condemnation, and eventually sometimes negotiation. The question is whether this time is different. Early indicators suggest we're in the early stages of a prolonged conflict. Path 1. Limited war. The most likely near-term outcome, U.S. and Israeli strikes continue for several days, targeting military and leadership infrastructure. Iran continues retaliatory strikes against U.S. bases and Gulf states. Casualties mount on both sides. International pressure builds for ceasefire. After weeks of fighting, both sides claim victory and accept a mediated pause. No regime change, no nuclear deal, no resolution. Just managed conflict that could resume at any time. Path 2. Widening war. Higher tension scenario. The conflict expands. Iran, unable to strike the U.S. homeland directly, intensifies attacks on Gulf allies. Houthi rebels in Yemen resume attacks on shipping. Hezbollah enters from Lebanon. Iraqi militias target U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria. The U.S. responds with wider strikes. Regional economies collapse. Global oil prices spike. This path tests whether the U.S. can fight a multi-front war while managing domestic political consequences. Path 3. Structural shift. Low probability, high impact. Path 3 doesn't look like a continuation of war. It looks like collapse. Iranian leadership, already under economic pressure, faces internal uprising. Trump's call for the Iranian people to take over your government resonates with a population exhausted by sanctions, inflation, and now war. The regime fractures, the Revolutionary Guard splits, parts of the military defect. The U.S. and Israel, instead of occupying Iran, support opposition factions. A new government emerges, one that dismantles the nuclear program, limits missile development, and reorients Iran toward the West. This would reshape the Middle East fundamentally. It would require the Iranian people to do what no foreign power has been able to achieve in 47 years. It would require the regime to collapse from within. Low probability. But if it happens, the structure of the region changes permanently. At 8:10 this morning in southern Iran, a girls' school in the city of Maddow was hit by an airstrike. 40 girls are dead. Their names haven't been released yet. Their faces haven't been shown. They are, for now, just numbers in a news report. But they are not just numbers. They are someone's daughters. They are someone's future. They are a classroom that will never finish its lesson. The strikes will continue, the retaliation will continue, the analysis will continue. But in Maddow, there is no analysis, there is no geopolitics, there is no strategic calculation. There is only grief. 16 U.S. Navy ships, 2 carrier strike groups, 12 American bases inside Iran's missile range, 1 school in a city called Maddow. This isn't about headlines, it's about leverage, it's about power, it's about what happens when strategy meets human life. Are we watching a necessary act of self-defense, or the beginning of something none of us can control? If you want to understand what happens next, before the headlines catch up to the human cost, stay with this channel.